Good morning, everybody. Today I want to spend a couple minutes talking to you guys about rental real estate, but two different categories that I talk about all the time, that I look at, and kind of some of the pros and cons of each, and the just the differences between them. Okay, so it's going to be single family. I think you guys can see that up there pretty well. And then multifamily. So a single family, just like it sounds, would be one house that you've purchased and, maybe has a yard, maybe has a garage, that type of thing. And then a multifamily could be as small as a duplex, but it might be a triplex, fourplex, or quad, sometimes it's called, or even larger of plexes, from sixplex to 12plex, 24, anything like that, 16. Okay, so different factors between them. So the end buyer, that is a lot of times when I talk to people about single family, they will bring up this point. And it's definitely a good, valid point. So just so you guys know, me personally, I specifically invest in multifamily, but I love helping people with single family rentals. And also I have a lot of experience managing single family rentals as far as that goes, okay? So I think both of them are great, and honestly, there's no good and bad. There's pros and cons of both, and it's actually very specific to your preference. If in 20 years, do you want 5 or 10 paid-for single-family homes, and then that's your retirement? Awesome, that's really, really great. I know quite a few people who that's their plan. I haven't met too many people that want 100 or 200 single-family houses, just because, like in the game of Monopoly, if you start getting that many, usually you trade up to a hotel, so like an apartment. So if you're trying to go super big scale, then you would go the multifamily. But if you don't want to own a big business, if you just want, to supplement your retirement, then maybe some of the smaller multifamilies or the single families would actually definitely fit yours. Again, it really depends on you. I'd love to chat with you guys more about this over a coffee or beer if you're in the Sioux Falls area. So the end buyer, again, with this, so this is like the end buyer. So you buy it and then you sell it 5, 10, 20 years later, 30 years later. Whenever you end up selling it, who is going to be your end buyer? Well, a single family house, that could be someone that wants to live in it. So maybe it's near a great school, really nice location, some coffee shops down the road, that or whatever you like as a nice location. There might be 1,000 people at any point looking for a single family house to buy to live in. Versus a duplex, it might be an owner-occupied duplex where they rent out one side, but it means it's someone going to be a landlord, or hire a property manager if they're not going to be a landlord. And then especially like triplex, fourplex, a sixplex, I haven't met anybody that actually lives in a sixplex that owns it. So usually for the multifamily, the end buyer is an investor. So there's some pros and cons with that. If the end buyer is the general public, you can probably sell it fairly quickly, and also, there may be a bidding war as far as getting that the price up depending upon the market, but you can probably sell it more quickly. Okay. Now, the end buyer for the multifamily, because it's an investor, investors want a deal. So they usually, the saying goes, is that they would want to, pay below market price. Well, if all the investors like that property, if it's a really good investment, the same scenario applies. They could actually be paying market rent, or sometimes even above if they're bidding it up, if they think they can add value or and improve the property and that type of thing. Okay, so that's the end buyer. Now, with that, I would say there's competition. Okay, in Sioux Falls, I don't know if there are hundreds of people looking for 12 and 24 plexes, but I do know right now there are hundreds of people looking for single family houses, whether that's to live in or to buy and rent out. So if you're looking at the same houses as other people are to rent out, then there is more competition in the single family area. Now, I'm not going to say there's not competition with your duplexes and fourplexes, because I actually do see quite a bit of that, because there's also hundreds of single family houses listed on the market right now, and then there's usually only a couple dozen, if that, of the multifamily properties in the Sioux Falls area here. So appreciation, okay? So single family houses, like 2008 and stuff, you see them going up. Sioux Falls, not like the coasts and some of the really big cities, we didn't see crazy appreciations when you look back at the data. But with appreciation, I personally like to just count it as, icing on the cake. I don't like to ever count on it. But if you do have a nice property, you're fixing it up, keeping it up in good condition, it's a nice location, everything. Single family houses can definitely appreciate, even if the rents aren't, and the income expenses, the net operating income doesn't actually have too much to play with the value of the home. It's going to be comparables. Did the one down the street sell because this is a hot neighborhood? Maybe McKinnon Park, a lot of people love that neighborhood, or near Falls Park, or really close to downtown. It's in the downtown area. Okay, so it's going to be very dependent upon the market, people's needs and wants, and that type of thing. But multifamily, it's going to be similar to that in the fact that if the stock market's doing something and then people are putting their money more into investment real estate, then the cap rate, the capitalization rate, which is essentially if you were to buy a $100,000 home and it were to be selling listed at a 7 cap, then that means the income from that should be $7,000. Okay, that's simply what it means. But some people might be willing to buy that property at an 8 cap, to where they might actually well, everybody would love to buy it at a 8 cap versus the 7 cap, because everybody would prefer 8,000 versus 7,000. But if there's 10 people that want that same property, well, who's willing to take it for 7,000? Or someone might say, hey, I'll take it for $6,500 return on my money, because that would be really good for me. And other people would say, no, I'm not taking anything less than 8,000 on my 100,000. So that's what the cap rate means as far as the demand for the market. So as far as the appreciation, that can change a little bit. But the really cool thing about multifamily homes with appreciation is that they call it forcing appreciation. Okay. So with single family, you might put on a new roof, new siding, really spruce it up, paint and carpet, fence in a yard, do some landscaping, and you can maybe say that's forced appreciation. I mean, that's kind of flipping. But with the multifamily appreciation, you can actually, let's say you're going to decrease the expenses and increase the income. Well, then that spread is an increase in profit, or the net operating income. Well, the increase of net operating income, as you guys have seen in some of my previous videos, that is the part that is actually divided by the capitalization rate. So then it's a multiplier of the value. Okay, so if you find a way to save $10 a month, okay, that's $120 a year. Then you divide that by, let's say, 10%. If the cap rate was 10%, which it's not usually, but just for simple math, then that would be $1,200. 120, $1,200. Yeah, I mean, so you can, that $10 a month, $1,200 in value. So you can actually force the appreciation. So you try to do more than $10 a month. The costs, okay? When you own the rental, usually in a single family house, the person is mowing the lawn, shoveling the snow, they have their own water bill, gas bill, that type of thing. If someone is in an apartment, usually they're only paying electric, okay? In Sioux Falls, that's pretty common. They might have one or two of the other utilities sub-metered. But so single family house, most of the utilities the tenant takes care of. And so if you bought that as a rental, you would not have to worry about those fluctuations. If you have a multifamily, then usually the owner would be covering, water or gas. There might be common area electric. There might be common area cleaning. There are different expenses on the multifamily as far as utilities and some potential common area things there. As far as vacancy, so this is actually really why, because I consider vacancy a very large expense, even though it's a phantom expense. People typically they don't no one's living there and they're just getting less income, so they don't think of it as an expense. Versus I say, well, 100% of the rent would be this, and you don't have 2 units rented, so that's, that much money you're not getting. That's the same as what an expense is. So vacancy is an expense, especially in my opinion here. Well, what I love about it is multifamily. When I had 4 units in my fourplex, okay, one person would move out. All right, so let's just say, for instance, that it was $500 a unit, 500, 1,000, 1,500, 2,000. Okay, and let's say my mortgage is $1,500. All right, so then that last one is essentially profit. Okay, well, one person moves out. Can I still pay the mortgage? All right, 5, 10, 15. I can actually still pay the mortgage. So one person moves out of a fourplex, and you still have 3/4 of the tenants. That means you still have 75% of the income coming in. Okay, let's do that with a single family house. All right, single family house, you might get higher rent, but with vacancy, that person moves out. How much income do you have to pay rent with? $0. Okay, so that's why I really like the multifamily, because you're actually, it's almost kind of like a mutual fund in a way. You're kind of spreading out the risks. Now this does work. Someone made a good point of, well, what if you had 4 single family houses? Okay, well, yes, that's the same, because then you'd have 4 mortgages to pay, and let's say they were all cash flowing, and then one house went vacant. Well, your other 3 houses could offset that. Okay, so it's essentially your first rental. You might think of it as a little bit risky, because no other sources of income, of investment income, other properties can help support that when it goes vacant, because it would be a 100% vacant, with a 0% occupancy. Okay. Turnover, this definitely varies, but I would say single family houses, people might tend to stay a little bit longer. In an apartment, a year, and then someone goes to find a different one is not crazy uncommon. I think the average was like around 18 months. Of course, some people stay in an apartment 5, 10 years. Some people stay there 6 months, but it seemed like the average was around year and a half. Well, single family houses, it's closer to that, I think, year and a half plus, versus apartments, it can be slightly less. So you do actually have more turnover in the multifamily than the single family. Another piece of that too is the square footage. Usually single family house, you're in 1,000, 1,500 plus square foot. Apartments, pretty common to be, 6, 7, 8, 900 square feet. So actually, when you do have to do cleaning, paint, carpet, that type of thing, in between tenants, I would say that the multifamily turns, even though they're more often, that they would be potentially less. Okay, now obviously there's lots of different factors there. So financing, just to not make this video crazy long, I would say single family, usually you can get a nice 30-year loan and put it on a shorter loan if you want, but you can stretch it out to 30-year amortization in general. Multifamily, once you go above 4 units, so 1, 2, 3, and 4, for an investment property, usually you could do a 30-year financing, but then once you go 5 units and above, then most commercial financing is amortized over 20 years. So you actually, because you have a shorter amortization to pay off the note, then that means the expense of the mortgage is higher, which means your profit is lower, so your cash flow is actually going to be lower that way. So that's a difference on the financing side. Again, talk to your banker about more details. So the last piece I wanted to mention here, sorry for the long video, is the economies of scale. So I mentioned at the beginning of the video, I've never met a person that's wanted to do 100 or 200 single family houses. In my mind, that would be a management nightmare, unless you had a management company, like a management team. Now, working at a management company, that's what we did, but we had systems and processes and a team. It was doable. Now, as I'm self-managing, I like to have all the units in one spot, or quite a few units per spot, because then that's one lawn to mow. It was one closing, one inspection, one insurance policy, and then you have however many units, let's say 6, okay, versus 6 different single family houses. Well, your mowing cost is going to be higher, because someone has to go and mow all of those. Same with shoveling, unless the tenants have that cost. But if you have with the economies of scale, usually you can actually go to, as far as buying supplies, this is what I found is you go to Menards and you buy, okay, well, there's 4 units, I need to get 4 shower heads. Well, the cool thing is to sometimes it is, let's say, $25 a piece, or just, let's throw out the numbers. The 4th one is usually super discounted or free. Okay, and then you get 16, and then you get a couple free ones essentially, or the discount. There's bulk discounts, bulk buying. Okay, when you have a single property or a single family house, it's just kind of harder to scale. Now, some people, home flippers, they definitely do that. They can do the same thing per unit. It's very easy to do with a multifamily. Yeah, 4 units, they'll have the same thing. You get bulk properties. Okay, so that's again the last piece here that I forgot to mention is that multifamilies, usually the price per unit per door would be cheaper. Okay, so a 4-plex should be cheaper than 4 single family houses in general. Okay, so as far as the scalability, that type of thing. So hopefully this was somewhat useful. I know that there's a lot of information. We could talk about this for days. Again, if you're in the Sioux Falls area and you're contemplating one of these investment properties, I would love to meet up with you. Pick your brain, figure out what your goals are, and then you can chat with me more about this. And then, because really, no matter which one you choose, if it fits with you, then that's a good investment for you specifically. So you guys have a good one. Thanks.